again. Okay, dope. All right. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the episode. Welcome to the KD session today. So, and I'll be discussing something a little bit interesting, and that is server-side development. And it's just today's presentation is majorly an overview, a tip into what server-side development is for those who have heard about it before, but don't know exactly what it is, or for those who are planning to get started with server-side development. So what it really is and what to expect, or if you basically want to know exactly what servers are, at the most beginner level, essentially, and how actually get to set them up, and how most of the technology that powers the most popular applications today, how they basically work. So that's what this presentation is all about. So let's go right into it. So we'll be looking at the overview of server-side development, and then we also look at client-side versus server-side programming and the difference basically, and how they connect. And then we'll look at backend technologies and tools, look at backend languages and framework, and then we'll conclude with that. And peradventure, we do have a little time, we can actually see how to set up a simple server, because it's actually quite simple to set up a server that actually interacts with the front end or with other form of application, maybe mobile application or even third-party applications, essentially. Okay, so let's go right into it. So what do we mean by server-side development? So it's also called backend development of backend programming. Maybe that's what we've heard about the most part. So it's essentially developing the server-side logic that powers web application or mobile application or even websites, generally speaking. So basically everything that happens behind the scenes of the application you have. For the most part, as a user, you have access to the client side of things, which I'm still going to talk about in a jiffy. And you probably have access to the website. You can click on some stuff, you can register your information, you can attempt to log in, you can attempt to, purchase something, you can attempt to do one thing or the other, maybe vote or give a rating. Okay, these are like client side of things, because you are the client and you're doing stuff. However, what happens behind the scenes whenever you take any form of action is basically what is the server-side development of things. So most of the time, there's a server that is powering the application you are interacting with, and some of those things you are doing are actually there's a logic that is handling them somewhere. Maybe when you log in and then it takes you to your dashboard, there's a logic that does that routing, for instance, and that's happening behind the scene because you are not seeing it. All you're doing as a person, as a client, is to click on the login or register or purchase, and then just see the application does this thing. So anything that happened behind the scene that now translates to the actions you are seeing is basically what server-side development is all about. And there are a lot of aspects that are connected to server-side development, but you can actually group them into three main core components or three main core concepts. So you talk about the server itself, you talk about databases, and then you talk about the application. And these are like the three tier of the application in a broad spectrum of things. So you have an application, that is one aspect of it, which you probably will interact with. Maybe it's a mobile app or a web application. And then the application is definitely running on some sort of servers, which we're going to talk about, maybe an Apache server, maybe some other form of server, basically, node server, for instance. So, and then sometimes when you work with data, for instance, you obviously have to work with databases, whether it is a relational SQL or non-relational databases like Mongo, for instance, so which actually gets your data, stores your data, retrieve those data, manipulate those data, essentially. So, and this is basically what constitutes server-side development overall. So now let's now track back a bit and look at what the front end and the back end really is. We are focused today is talk about back end things and then get started with it. So like I mentioned before, front end programming is basically the client side of things. So and you work with popular let's say, popular front-end technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or maybe frameworks like React, JS, Angular, Vue, and some other ones. And basically, you create files, front-end files, like you design layouts, you design interfaces, basically, that users can interact with. But for the most part, this thing, they are static, but you see them in your browser, in your client, maybe Mozilla Firefox or Chrome or Safari, depending on which browser you're using. But you see those are like the front end of things. It's what you see. Right now, you are seeing your Zoom, you are seeing some other things. That is like the front end. You can see your screen, you can see some other people images maybe lined up on your right hand side, or for me on the bottom part of my screen, or maybe it's even hidden. You can see me sharing my screen, stuff like that. So those are like the UI of things, the client side of things. You are the client, I am also the client, I am saying this. Whereas we are interacting with it basically because I can like make some control to the next, to the forward, stuff like that. So, but then the back end of things is what happens behind the scenes, on the server, in the sides where you are not even seeing. So sometimes even they've got to explain it, and then maybe wherever it is stored, maybe on a cloud or some dedicated computer somewhere, which basically are like servers, and then databases. You would see that you do have an account, maybe on your Zoom, for instance, and you do have a profile because you can have your image. You can set up your image. It does like those things are stored in a database somewhere, and then you can retrieve them anytime you log into your account. So this is like the back end of side of stuff. So the server that is like doing all the magic, the database that stores your data, and then the logic basically that like happen one way or the other. That somebody clicks on share screen, that icon, that's the UI. The icon that share screen is the UI. And then when somebody clicks on it, what happens? That's the logic side of things, and that's like what the backend basically and they are connected together because you interact with the server, which you are not basically seeing through the UI, which is the front end basically, and that's the way the front end and the back end basically work in the end of things. So now let's look at this this diagram, which actually explains it, summarizes what we're talking about here. So you can see that we have I will say three, but two major parts of it. You can see at the top side of things, you have the front end, user front end, and then you have in this box the back end. So in this side, you have basically the front end technology, what the users interact with, the pages they are seeing, the images they are seeing, the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, maybe basically. That is what they see. They click on something, they see the result. They click on the other things, they see the result. That's basically what they do. They don't care what happens. But then just beneath the thing, beneath the grand scheme of things here, you have a bunch of things. You have web servers, you have file system, you have database, basically. So look at the web server, for instance, and which I'm going to explain. This contains the logic essentially. Maybe you've used some server-side scripting language to write the logic essentially, and that is what gets those things you are doing, those interaction you are having, from the front end essentially. So somebody does something, it interacts, it sends something to the server, and then the server checks through the logic within it and say, oh, I'm supposed to do this when somebody does this to the UI, and then it does that. Maybe it's supposed to retrieve some information. It's going to retrieve the information from the database. Maybe it's supposed to like display another form of file system, maybe an image or another page. So it's going to obviously display that, which is something you can obviously do too. And that's basically the way it interacts together. So the users don't have access to the servers or the database directly, but through the front end, they do have access to it and they can interact with that. Interested in. So what are the backend technologies? If you're going to get started with server-side programming, that you actually need to get yourself familiar to. The first thing is servers, and of course databases. If you're going to be working with data, which you would anyway, you don't want to build it. The application you're going to build is obviously going to use some form of data. So of course you need form of database, and of course middlewares, which I'm going to talk about, and then APIs, which is application programming interfaces. Because okay, we do, these days, most of the framework I'm going to talk about again, we have like full stack, and then you can basically develop the front end and the back end. But for the most side of things, you can actually develop starting on servers essentially. And the way you can connect standing on servers or standing on backend, what's it called now, side of the application to another front end side of the application is through APIs for the most part. So that your application, which is the backend, the server side of things, can basically connect with another client side of things or with multiple client side of things through the application programming interface. So let's start with servers. Servers basically are computers. That's what it is. Your computer, my computer are servers. All right. And you might have heard of this term before, localhost. So if you, let's say, build your client side of things now, and you use maybe VS Code to write as your text editor to write it, or maybe you even use a normal text editor, and then you save it to .html. If you look at, the icon, probably see Chrome icon there, and you can basically serve it. You can serve it, like you can view the file based on what you've done. So your computer at that point in time is acting as the server to serve your file. So it's reading the information and then it's displaying it for you, as the case may be. So, but then in production, or let's say in when you talk about actual application that you're not going to be the only one to use now, we have dedicated computers that actually provide shared resources that network needs to run, including file storage, security, encryption, even databases, email and web services. So you have dedicated computer also that you can basically write your file system and upload them to it, or let's say deploy them to these web servers, maybe AWS, DigitalOcean, and all. They provide those kind of services, and then they actually help you serve your information, serve your logic. So you upload your logic and your file system, or maybe your logic is actually running some file system elsewhere. So by the time you those servers basically do that for you. They are dedicated computer, and then everybody can have access to it. So when you like deploy your project with live server somewhere, it's a live server, so other people can view whatever thing you've done there. Maybe the files you've created, you've stored your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, your images, and all of those things, or maybe the logic you've written. Maybe you created the CMS for instance, content management system, or I want to view this, I want to create this, I want to do this. Basically, the server, that dedicated computer, does that for you essentially. All right, and then some other things like emails connected to servers, are also connected to databases, which can even be another standalone layer. Of course, the understanding layer, but the servers are connected to them, and basically works that way. That's one aspect of it, and it's a major aspect of server-side programming, because literally that's where the name is coming from. So in this case now, you obviously need to learn a server-side language or a programming language that can interact with computers, that can speak to them directly, and then you use that to create the logic, and they speak to these computers, these dedicated computers, these AI-powered computers, and then they do the magic for you essentially. Then databases. So if you want to work with data, which you almost certainly would do in backend programming, because you're going to collect data from your client, basically. So you need a database to do that. So the database is basically responsible for storing data. In addition to storing data, you also query data, you fetch data, you modify them. Depending on the case, you can modify your password, for instance. It gets stored somewhere. You can modify your profile information, for instance. It gets somewhere. You can upload some images, for instance. It gets stored. You can delete your account, it gets deleted, something like that. So, and databases generally can be, structured query language or non-structured query language. So, SQL and NoSQL. So, SQL and non-SQL, as well pronounce it. So, for instance, if you're writing structured query languages like MySQL, for instance, or Postgres, Postgres work. They work with most of these server-side programming languages. Postgres, Node.js, Postgres, Laravel, PHP, PHP, MySQL, and all of those things. And of course, NoSQL like MongoDB and some other ones too. So, and of course, you can study in depth, because structured query languages deal with relation. They are relational. So you have different tables that are related to one another. The user table is related to this, related to that. Whereas the non-relational, of course, like the term is non-relational. They just use object models to store particular information in those on this object essentially. So that's about database, and you need to name them also, because your server will be connected to it, and then what I showed us here before, you can see your web server is connected to your database, query data, all of this stuff essentially. So the other thing is middleware. Now, middleware is a server-side client, and basically it forms a middle layer to things, and I'm just going to explain it in this way. So supposing you have a list of users, different kind of users on your application. Let's say even you have admins on your applications. You have regular users. You have premium users. All of those things. You see, or you have some routes that are only exclusive to registered users. So let's say that there are some pages that anybody can visit on your application, but there's some that only registered users can visit. This is where middlewares come into play. So middlewares just serve as that middle layer that, does some other routing, extra things. You can do a lot of things, but that's the major part of it. And say, oh, who are you? You're an admin section. Okay, you're an admin person. Oh, these are the kind of things you can do. These are the areas you can go to. Oh, who are you? You're a normal user. No, you can't go to this direction. Go to this direction. That's what middlewares are. Like mostly. So they form a middle layer and then they do some guiding and say, okay, due to this scenario, due to this kind of due to this circumstance that we have now, this is what is best fit for this user or for this action, and then they do the guiding basically for that. So middleware is an important part. If you want to protect, let's say, if you want to protect certain route now, let's say cutting. If somebody wants to come to your site and buy something and add to cart, obviously you need the person, you need the identity of the person. So somebody who does not have an identity shouldn't be able to cut some items, even though they are able to view those items. But if they want to cut, they have to be logged in or registered at the very least. So a middleware we just have and say, okay, something like, oh, you can't cut, sorry, you have to be registered in. So we have to have them registered. And then once they're registered, can say, okay, good, we now recognize you. So you can then cut in and then you can then check out, as the case may be, stuff like that. So that is a major aspect, and middleware is an important part of server-side programming too. Then API, and for me, I think this like the hallmark of it. So application programming interface, it just basically allows different applications to share data and functionality easily and securely. And mostly when we're talking about different application now, just have it in your mind that we're talking in broad spectrum of things, the backend application and the front-end application. Like I said, these days we do have frameworks that like full stack, and then you can develop both the front end and then on the backend in the same application package. However, most of the times you want to have a standalone, you want to have your backend application different from your front-end application. And the way you link them together to do the magic I've been talking about is through application programming interfaces. So you build APIs, you build routes that the front-end application then links to and then perform this action. So you want to get users to be logged in, and then you designed your login interface, your login UI basically. All right, it's not going to do anything unless that submit button is linking somewhere. It's maybe sending those information to a route. I mean, maybe the login API, for instance. So you build the login API, and it's already served somewhere in a server, and then your what's the code number? Your application now, your front-end application now can then send that information through that route and then logs the person in, and then, oh, we now know who this person is. This is Semeton Balogun, welcome to our application. You can do this, you can do that, you can do this based on your subscription level. Oh, you can't do that, you're not allowed to do that, stuff like that. So this is what API does, and there is a whole lot of talk around API, but it is an integral part of backend programming. There are different form of API, also RESTful API, which is like the most popular, also SOAP and as a backend developer, as a server-side engineer, you need to know how to write APIs. That's just the bottom line of things. You need to learn how to write APIs, because that is the way you connect your application to other application, whether it's a front end or even, let's say you want to build a web app for your application. You also want to build a mobile app for your application. You want to build a desktop application. So those are like different client side of things. You have the web app, the desktop app, and the mobile app, and they can all run on the same backend server, which is the very beautiful thing. If you've written your logic in a very clever and very secured way and the most efficient way, and that just works basically. So let's clear on and let's look at some of the backend languages and then some of the popular frameworks that work with it. So yeah, of course, I'm going to start with PHP since I write PHP. And also write Laravel and G. So PHP is a server-side language. It's a scripting language, but you use to write server-side logic. You also write it, it's embedded into HTML basically. So you write PHP and then you use it to manage those data essentially. And Laravel, G are like frameworks that you can actually use to build the servers essentially. Laravel is a full stack framework that has both the front end component, the MVC, model view and controller framework, which also has the front end component of things and then the back end component of things. And basically, you can build your you can use it to build a full stack or even a standalone backend application for using let's say the API route, if you're using Laravel, for instance, which if we do have some time, we might look through, but I'm not sure we do. So another one is Node. Node is a JavaScript runtime, and then with Express Server, you can also build a Node server. So basically, it's very incredible, very easy. Can use it with other. We can use with a range of databases like MySQL. Okay, Laravel works well with MySQL and Postgres. Node work with MySQL, Postgres, or even NoSQL like MongoDB, which it actually works best with. Not really best, works with all of them, but quite well with Mongo also. C++, C# rather with .NET, Python, Django. Django is like a standalone backend program framework to write your backend logic, essentially. Also uses Postgres and some other what's it called now? SQL languages or databases, Java and Spring, Ruby on Rails. So these are like these languages that you have to learn if you want to write server-side scripting. So you have to like pick one and learn it, and of course, most of the time they all work around the same logic. You have to learn object-oriented programming and how to use this to build like basically this your server, all right, maybe the entry point, obviously the ports that is going to be opening on your dedicated server. You are going to be like hosting it at all and all of this stuff. And so you have to get familiar with this to learn how to use them to write the logic and basically serve your application. So that is it. And let me just end with this. So you have your application, you'll be enjoying it, and basically you do one thing or the other, guides you this, guides you that, and all. You're like, oh, this is fun and all. Yeah, because a whole lot of things is happening beneath the scene that you're not even seeing. So you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. And what is happening behind the scene is basically what is called the backend programming or the server-side programming. So this brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you for listening. I don't know if anybody have any question.
All right. Thank you very much for the beautiful presentation. For me, I really do not have any question.
Okay. I have a question for Semeton.
All right.
Yeah. So my question is kind of with a controversial issue in the world of programming or technology, as case may be. So I just want to know, in your own opinion, which is should I say easier to learn, as for instance, as a newbie who wants to start out with programming, which is easier, is it the front end or the back end? Yeah, your own opinion.
Okay, well, okay, well, everybody has opinion, but to be frank, though, even as a backend, let me just start with that. Even as a backend developer, you will still need to understand like different end technologies for the most part, because your logic, your backend logic is not going to run alone. Eventually, it's going to be interacting with some front end technology. So you need just to get familiar with it in either ways. So, well, in terms of which one is easier or not, I think it depends on whoever is learning. To be very honest, so there is no one that's exactly easy that way. Even if you think it's easy at first, by the time you drill down and then you go further, you get surprised that there's actually a lot more concepts, to learn. But if you're going to really start out, I would really say that at least, even if you're going to go into backend programming eventually, you should still get familiar. You should familiarize yourself with the front-end technology. At the very least, learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all the work. At least, maybe if you do have some time, you can learn a framework, just the basics. Then you can now really dive into what's it called now? Into the backend development, because at least in case you're going to be developing APIs, you should at least visualize how it's going to be implemented on the front end as a backend engineer too. So that's what I would say.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I don't know if you have any other questions.
Yeah, no further question from my end.
All right. So thank you guys for listening. So I guess.
All right. Thank you, Patrick, for that question. Thank you, Semeton, also. So I guess this is just the end of this session. Thank you for joining the call.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.